you'll see a magical performance. Just a bit of housekeeping for those who weren't next door. If you've got mobile phones, make sure they're off or on silent. If you need the toilets, they're just outside that door and to the right. And if we have to leave the room, evacuate for some reason, out those doors. And if for some reason the cause for evacuation is on that side, there's a door at the back here, back corner. Okay, so that's the housework done, and as always, we pay our respects to the traditional owners, the Wiradjuri people, the elders past and present, and extend that same respect to the community members here today. On that note, I'd like to welcome the Kapooka Army Band to play the first number, Glorious Victory. Genuine local and national treasure. We are so privileged to have them based here in Wagga Wagga, and I hope they're here for a long time yet. So I think I should introduce the musical director, Sergeant Stuart Jeffress, and the conductor bandmaster, Captain Gregory Peterson. Thank you both, gentlemen, today. And our narrators. And our narrators today are Jillian Durance and Michelle Madison, who I referred to earlier, that will be speaking about band-related, World War I related subjects. So on that note, I'd like to welcome Jillian Durance to the microphone.
Thank you. In the days before radio, television, or any form of recorded music, brass bands were at the centre of popular culture. People could sit around and sing around their pianos but in the great outdoors, brass bands could provide the volume you needed to hear and to be heard. You could find a brass band in the smallest of places now that no one has ever heard of, like Jumbunna on the coalfields of South Gippsland and Corombi on the great Wimmera Plains of Victoria. And in the famous Riverina district of New South Wales, you could find a band in Junee, Leeton, Narrandera, Henty, and of course, Wagga Wagga. Bands entertained the people in parks, provided dance music in country halls, played hymns at church services and funerals, provided the formality at the opening of public buildings and railways, raised funds for hospitals, and provided a healthy pastime for young men with any time on their hands.
Wagga had an official town band as early as the 1860s, known as the Wagga Wagga Band. With the later addition of brass instruments, the band was renamed the Wagga Wagga Town Band. A host of other bands followed, including Lily's Brass Band, the Hibernian Band, Newtown Band, Citizens Band, and even a kazoo band in which the men played foot-long bullock horns. By World War I, Wagga boasted two brass bands, the Wagga Wagga Brass Band and the Wagga Wagga Citizens Band. Wagga's bandsmen came from all walks of life. In addition to professional musicians like the Homan family, band members were firemen, blacksmiths, builders, and even a horticulturalist. Most were from working class backgrounds, and many were immigrants from Britain and Europe. Prior to World War I, the men of the Bruce family, who were all employed as carpenters by the building firm Hardy and Company, were active members of the Wagga Brass Band. Brothers John, Alan and Charles all saw active service during the war, with only Alan returning home. On the 4th of August 1914, Great Britain, her allies and dominions far across the sea went to war against Germany, the aggressor who had invaded Belgium. Wagga's bands were kept busy performing at numerous recruiting, patriotic and charitable functions that were held in the Wagga district. In October 1914, they were part of a lantern lecture on the war given by the Reverend Canon Pike. At appropriate intervals, together they performed a musical program, which concluded with the national anthem and La Marseillaise. France was also at war with Germany. The French and Belgian countryside became the front line. France was Britain's great ally. Across Australia, the local bands were ready to help recruiters encourage young men to rally around the flag.
very British and very stirring. We heard Soldiers of the King, sometimes known as Soldiers of the Queen, a tune that was made popular during the Boer War, the well-known Rural Battalion, and the British Grenadiers, the regimental march of the British Grenadier Regiment. You also heard our former national anthem, which was the official one at the time of the Great War. And even though we had become a federated nation in 1901, we were still known as British subjects. And that's how our soldiers saw themselves too. Our king was King George V, and Melbourne was our capital. Canberra, still at the planning stage with only 2,000 people, was not even the size of Wagga Wagga. By late 1915, with the war already a year old, many of Wagga Wagga's young men had already joined up, had sailed with the first contingent out of Albany to Egypt, and then landed on the beach that became known as Anzac Cove. Some Wagga Wagga soldiers died at the landing and in the months afterwards, such as Private Reginald Duke of Edward Street. The troops of Australia's 1st Expeditionary Force held out until the evacuation of the peninsula in December 1915. Among them was Sergeant Redhead of Gurwood Street, Wagga Wagga, who wrote home about the army biscuits that were so hard that they broke his tooth, about his feet troubled by chilblains as the cold set in, and the terrible Turkish bombardments he endured in the front line trenches. His brother Mark would be one of the first Kangaroos to join up. With the mounting British casualties on Gallipoli and on the battlefields of the Somme, King George needed more men, and as the time for the evacuation of Gallipoli drew near, the appeal for more troops went out to the far-flung towns and country areas of Australia.
Many men of Wagga Wagga who had not enlisted earlier heeded the call, as recruitment meetings took place in Little Gurwood Street, which is now Sturt Street. They were urged with fiery speeches and rousing music played by the Wagga Wagga bands to join those Australians already at the front. By November, the Wagga Recruiting Association decided that the best way to increase the necessary number of recruits was to send their men on a march to Sydney, inspiring other country recruits to join up along the way. Among the marchers would be Carpenter Hugh Hamilton, a member of the Wagga Wagga Citizens Band, who was given his own special farewell by the band, as well as the gift of a wristlet watch. He was the 16th member of that band to enlist. The march was given the name Kangaroo, the kangaroo being one of our national emblems. They would march behind a banner painted with the words, "I go out to return, and by courage and faith for king and country."
On the 1st of December 1915, as the men of the Kangaroo March assembled ready to leave, the Wagga Wagga Brass Band accompanied them, their family and friends, in the singing of that famous patriotic hymn, the recessional God of Our Fathers. The band led them out of the town and accompanied them at various stages along the way. Troops were cheered along the way, and it was the role of the band to march them into each town and out again. Sometimes they were accompanied by the local bands of those little towns. The beat of that drum and the rhythm of the march remained as a memory for those recruits. How I would love to have those 5 weeks again be called one many years later. We used to sing all day as we marched along. We had a band and a kettle drum, and everyone was so happy. The march had set out on the 1st of December 1915 with 88 marchers dressed in dungarees and white hats. The Kangaroos walked from Wagga Wagga, Brucedale and Harefield through Juni, Illabo, Bethunga, Cootamundra, Ullanbeen, Gaylong, Gunda, Binalong, Bowning, Yass, Goulburn, Wingello, Bundanoon, Exeter, Sutton Forest, Moss Vale, Mittagong, Picton, Camden, Campbelltown and Petersham. And many country recruits joined along the way, and by the time it reached the Domain in Sydney on the 7th of January 1916, the Kangaroo March had a nominal strength of 222 men. After training and before their embarkation for the front, the men were given leave to return to Wagga Wagga to farewell family and friends and sweethearts. Here they were given a final rousing farewell with the bands playing, and at the railway station, soldiers were serenaded with the popular patriotic song, Australia Will Be There, Auld Lang Syne, and the perennial wartime favourite, Keep the Home Fires Burning. later, the Wagga Wagga Brass Band would proudly say that they had accompanied the boys all the way to Sydney, but they had also sent many of their own members overseas. By 1917, the Wagga Brass Band had 34 active playing members at the front. Their music also helped to keep the home fires burning as they played to entertain, maintain morale and to raise funds for the Red Cross and other war-related causes. They played at the Wagga railway station when soldiers departed for the front and welcomed home the wounded. Meanwhile, the men of the Kangaroo March had embarked on ships carrying them ultimately to the Western Front of France and Belgium. They had become members of the battalions of the 1st AIF, among them the 55th, the 56th, the 13th and the 30th. All of these battalions had their own bands, and these played many important roles throughout the war. Initially, many of the bandsmen were stretcher bearers, but behind the lines and in the rest areas, their job was to maintain the morale of the troops. They played on the parade ground, they played at YMCA concerts, in village squares, they played on route marches, they marched troops to railway stations, into towns and out again, keeping the troops in step as they went along. They played marches like Alexander Lithgow's Invercargill and the famous Tipperary.
their own versions of that song, Tipperary, a song some claimed would never die, along with many others that became popular at home, like Pack Up Your Troubles in Your Own Old Kit Bag. But the battalion bands also had other duties. They played hymns at the battalion and brigade church parades, with Abide With Me, God of Our Fathers and Lead Kindly Light topping the list of favourites. Sometimes the band took on the solemn duty of playing at a funeral, for an officer particularly, or sometimes a French civilian. On such occasions, both at home and abroad, you would find the bands playing Handel's famous Dead March in Saul. The band will now play that tune in memory of all those men of the Wagga Wagga district and of the Kangaroos in particular who died in foreign fields.
The battalion bands also had the more cheerful duty of livening up the dangerous, dreary and horrific existence of the Australian troops so far from home. Many of these tunes were popular at the time. Some were composed during the war and many are still known to us today. The music ranged from sentimental love songs to patriotic rallying tunes, from dance numbers to well-known classics, waltzes and opera, from hymns to favourite folk songs. Now the band is going to play a selection of tunes that were popular both at home and abroad, tunes that the band might play or just one lone soldier with a cornet in his trench. We will hear the band playing It's a Long, Long Trail, Handel's Hallelujah Chorus, The Rosary and Home Sweet Home. This music might lift the morale and spirits of a weary soldier, but would also remind him of the faraway home he may not have seen for 4 years. many of the men of the Kangaroo March did not return to Australia, those who were lucky enough to have survived the war came home. Men like Hugh Hamilton, who had played with the Wagga Wagga Citizens Band, his brother Ernie, did not return. The returning soldiers were welcomed at the railway station by family and friends, wives and sweethearts, and by townspeople who had heard of their deeds in the local papers and read of their lighter experiences in letters home. The awful truth of those soldiers' experiences most chose not to share. Knowing what we know now of the horror that was the Great War, it's a miracle that so many survived at all. One of the tunes the town bands played at those welcome homes was Handel's famous "See the Conquering Hero Comes." But those who returned rarely saw themselves as heroes. They had gone to war for a cause, their country and king. But by the end, they were fighting for their friends, their mates in the battalion. And as many said afterwards, I just did my bit. The Australian Army band Kapooka for their splendid rendition of the music of the Kangaroo March and the Great War. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the work of today's musical director, Captain Greg Peterson, and band coordinating Sergeant Stuart Jeffries for their hard work and enthusiasm for this project. Also, a special thank you to Major Peter Thomas, who initially got behind this project and moved it forward. And thanks to Corporal Justin Kennedy too for his beautiful lighting and wonderful sound. I'd like to thank Michelle Madison of the Museum of the Riverina for helping me not only research but also to present today. So thank you, Michelle. Yeah. And I would like to acknowledge the work of all of the researchers, anyone who has had anything to do with the Kangaroo March and the beautiful exhibition that you are now invited to go and have a look at, or another look at. And I would like to thank Luke Greeley, of course, for inviting me to come to Wagga Wagga to present this particular project. The music of the Great War is very dear to me, because my own grandfather was in the 21st Battalion Band. And finally, I would like you to show your appreciation to the band again for their wonderful music today. It was very, very stirring, very, it reached the heart. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, everyone. And now the the band is going to take us out with the Army March. Thank you.
I only ever saw him. Oh, you know.